Hey guys, this is Jack with Team Empire, and today I'm covering my Luard deck profile that I took, or deck that I took to Tampa Bay BCS. Managed to get top 32, which was pretty cool. Luard is probably as a deck throughout these past few BCSs and obviously Springfest from last year that I've fallen in love with this deck even more. It's gotten even more fun in Divines, and it's a deck that I think has a few niches that really put it in like a very good spot in the meta. Not like meta like one of the best decks, but it is a very good rogue deck in my opinion. And you know how I feel about rogue decks. So I'm gonna go over some of the deck. I'm not gonna go over like a ton of like what the skills are. If you're new to Luard or want to learn some of the skills, learn some of the stuff about Luard, I have my previous deck profile from Springfest. That was from a year ago. If you want to check that one out, because I give a very good overview of the deck. Or you can check out my deck showcase video, which I'll actually have it linked right here in the card. That'll go over all of the like base Luard stuff that you get, and obviously for any new cards that aren't in that video, I will cover them extensively here. So with that out of the way, let's cover the deck. We played just standard ride line, and I have this, which I had before because I took this deck to Philadelphia and I managed to get top 32 there. And the reason why I'm not posting that deck is because one, it's already on VG Paradox, but two, because I've changed the list significantly based on other Luard lists that I've looked at. Yeah, so that's the ride line. Nothing really much here. You have to play this ride line if you're playing Luard. We played 2 copies of regular Luard in the main deck. I've seen people play 1 Luard in the main deck, and I don't really agree with that. The main reason is because if you open with like 2 owls, not only can you fill your ritual count by 2, but you can also thin 2 cards immediately out of your deck. One you can use to discard for a grade 3 for Stride, or the other one you can discard for Ride, or you can save in your hand so when you use Drag Strider. To go along with the Luard, I've also seen people who play 1 Luard play 2 copies of Solemn Cloud. I also don't really agree with that either, because Solemn Cloud's not a card that I want to prioritize having multiple copies of in my deck. Like, yeah, if it gets damaged, that sucks, but it's not that big of a deal because there's other ritual units that you can call off of your drag driver. You can call Morfessa for like a 20k attacker, and potentially you'll check more triggers, putting it at like 30, 40. Or Luminosity Wizard, which is also a really good attacker for that turn that can also be used later when you go into Drag Strider. So yeah, it's just, I don't really want multiple copies of it because it's a grade 3 and it doesn't really do anything besides being a big attacker. Now this is a new card that's not going to be covered in one of those videos. It is Deira. I played this card during both Philadelphia and Tampa, and this card is just really good. It's a straight up just Shadow Paladin Searcher, and considering the fact that, from top 5 of course, Izasawa for Shadow Paladins, or Undercovers. So you can actually find this card off of herself, or you can find Morfessa, or Semius, which is really good if you're up against like a Stride deck set, which I only faced 1 Stride deck set in the entirety of Tampa. It was Harry. But if you ever facing like Night Rose, you can obviously use this card to keep up with their grade 2 game by adding your 15k attacker Morfessa, or adding your 10k booster Semius. And obviously in like other matchups, like non-Stride deck set matchups, you can add cards like Abyssal Owl, which can then discard itself to thin another card out of your deck, which is Luard, or you can search out your PGs, which is really good. So Deira is one of my favorite cards in the deck. The second skill doesn't matter as much. I've rarely used it because I mostly use my soul for cards like Painkiller, but it is a nice skill to have just in case you do have an excess amount of soul. Like if you're facing prison or something, you need to clear out your soul. So Deira is an amazing card. Another card that's been played in like most Luard lists is a 4 of, just obvious, Piscotti. The second skill doesn't matter because you're never persona riding, but you are going to use the first skill when you discard it to ride into your grade 1. If you go second, you get to draw 3 cards from your deck, which is obviously insane. And then also being able to guard with it, just thinning out your deck, especially in Luard. Like one of my games against a Reziel player, which is actually King Crow from Kingslayer cards, a super cool guy, super fun final round of Swiss. He was about to win, but I thinned my deck to a certain extent, and I kept putting PGs back, and I wasn't seeing them off my drive checks. I guarded with the Biscotti, and I was like, well, I have to draw the PG or else I lose, and I managed to draw the PG and guard out his entire turn. So Biscotti, especially in the late game, becomes really good when you're putting like important cards like PGs back into your deck. Now, if you watch my previous Luard deck profile from like a year ago, I was on the believer like of the 1 maple train, but now I'm on the 2 maple train. I've converted. So the reason why I play 2 maple isn't even really for that whole interaction where you can call a maple, retire off the stride skill with Luard, and then call another one back. I'm on the train that I play 2 just because I want to see it. Like, I want to see it on like before I stride, because like, it's not the worst thing in the world to discard a card to revive Leofail, but I mean, there's some cards you just don't want to discard from your hand, and preferably just being able to call Maple and then retire it to get a plus to your board is just much better. So I played the 2 Maple just so I can more easily see a Maple. Next up, we have Morfessa. Morfessa is pretty obvious. It's a card that's been a 4 of for a long time, mainly because it's a ritual unit and it's a card that can turn itself into a grade 1. So those are really the only 2 things. I imagine if we get a card very similar to Morfessa in the future, where it counts as a grade 1 and has like a better like actual like rearguard skill, I'll probably play that over Morfessa, or maybe take out the amount of Morfessas in my deck. But as of right now, it's really the only option we have, and she's still a fine card, but she's not definitely like fallen off in comparison to some of these other cards, which in my opinion have gotten better. Next up, we have Ezros. Ezros is obviously just Ezros, and you're probably wondering why I don't play Elementaria. The only reason why I don't play Elementaria is because Deora exists. If Deora didn't exist, I'd probably obviously play Elementaria, because decks like Odium are in the meta, or even Shiranui, Night Rose, decks that you can obviously use a free PG is pretty nice. But I want to not only see Ezros off of Deora, but I also want to be able to put back more normal units into my deck off of Luard. So that's the reason why I don't play Elementaria at all, because I just play the base PGs. Next up, 4 copies of Abyssal Owl. The reason why I play Owl at 4 is actually the same reason I gave back in my original Luard deck profile. It's because Owl is a countercharger that you need multiple copies of in order to use. And being able to open like 1 to 2 Owls on turn 1 is really good, again, for thinning 2 cards out of your deck. And he's better than some of the other discard to search for your grade 3, because he's really good in the late game, really good to draw off of cards like your energy generator. Draw this, discard it, grab a Luard so you can use it immediately for Dragstrider. But it's also really good because you're fueling your ritual count. You're just like free discard of a grade 1. So I do play 4 Owl because we do need countercharge in this deck, especially with Luard using CB, with his Stride, Drag Driver using a CB, Morfessa using a CB, and then Deora using a CB. It's a lot of CB going around. A card that I continue to play as a 4 of is Semius. This card is so good. Like, the first skill is pretty nice because it's obviously a 10k booster. It's really good. 10k booster attacker is pretty nice, especially when you call this with a painkiller. It's 18k column, but also really good because when it's placed during battle phase, you can let top 2 call 1. And you don't have to call 1. You can like call up to 1. So if you see 2 triggers or something, you can put them on the bottom, which happened quite a few times. But being able to thin all the non-trigger, non-PG units out of your deck for basically for free is just so good. Like, calling 2 of these, not only are you thinning 2 cards out of your deck with Luard's Stride skill, but you're also potentially thinning 2 more cards off both the Semiuses. And if you find a Semius off a Semius, it's just like it's peak. So good. So yeah, Semius is a card that I'm going to play as a 4 of. It really helps you build up your boards for a Dragstrider turn, doing Dragstrider turns very consistently. Speaking of Dragstrider turns, we have the card that's basically made for Dragstrider turns. It's Luminosity Wizard, which can increase your power, your Vanguard's power by 5k. That's really the only reason I play it, besides being another good target to call off Drag Driver, because you don't really use the Soul Charge too often. I think I used it like once or twice during my rounds, but the main thing you use it for is the additional 5k, especially if you know like your opponent damage checks Elementaria, if they have to use Elementaria early. Being able to use this on Dragstrider and make his number even just the slightest bit bigger to prevent your opponent from guarding. So Luminosity is really good for that. A little tech that we've added that's inspired by the BCS Spain list that got second is Pararies. So the reason why we play this card is because like the 2 best decks in the meta, which is Levidros and Rezile, which is based a lot of Rezile, you can just call this down, and then they're very much discouraged by doing 5 attacks. which you could say, oh, they could play around it anyways by not calling 2 cards to both their columns with Vita, or not swinging with Squirrel and instead boosting with Squirrel. But if that happens, that's literally what this card is doing. This card is doing more than it says on the card, because they're actively preventing my opponent from even playing into it. So it basically just doing its job no matter what. Like, this card is really, really good against those 2 decks. Not really good against Odium. It's not good against Varga for sure, but then I faced some Varga in the tournament. And it might have been good against Aled Dilemma, but I also got very lucky and never faced an Aled Dilemma. Next up we have Painkiller Angel. If we had Surgown, obviously Surgown would be here, but that would be broken. So Painkiller is a card that's always been good to me since I played Luard. Not only is it just like a really good card to have in the early game, really good card to call off Luard, especially if you have spare soul, but also in the early game, when you Soul Blast it, you can Soul Blast your knees in your ride line, your grade 1, and then you can immediately have 2 additional grade 1s in your drop for Ritual. So that's really good. Like, Painkiller is just a really solid card. It's still going to be solid. I used to play as a 4 of, but definitely not anymore. That's a 2 of now. And now moving on to triggers, we play 8 crit, 3 front, and then 4 vanilla heals. Now the reason why I play vanilla heals as opposed to like any of the restander heals or the crit heals is because Rezael, Odium, and Varga don't actually restand any rear guards. And while Levidros does pick up a crit, it's only for 1 turn. It's only for the Vanguard, which is already going to be much bigger than guarding with even that like with the restander or crit heal, I should say. So being able to like use that, you drop even more cards. You might as well just PG that attack anyways. So having these in the early game, especially when numbers are like a little more guardable, is super nice. I used to play draws, but fronts are just like inherently better in this format because of how much scaling some decks have, and being able to drop this on like a 28k attack for like most general decks is very good. And obviously crits, you want to play a lot of crits, especially with this deck since you can put more crits back. So for some games, it feels like you're actually playing more crits than your average player. And then let's just talk about Overtrigger. Overtrigger, I played the purple OT, because you can make an argument between this and blue OT, and while blue OT is still cool because you can like recover PGs back from drop, like you don't put back. Usually I put back my PGs in Luard anyways, so I'm using this more for like stalling out the game even more, because my 2 win conditions in most of my games for BCS was either Drag Strider for game, like get them with enough Drag Striders to win, or deck out, which it's really good to deck out your opponent with like Levidros or Rezael, because both those decks do burn through their deck extremely quickly. So I feel like this is just better for stalling the game, which I've checked it quite a few times playing Luard, and it's really, really nice for like putting the tempo right back in my favor. Then for Regalis piece, we play Twin Casts. I've seen people play a Caliburn because of like the amount of CB this deck burns through along with Soul, and being able to draw 2 cards. And that's not a bad choice, but I really like Twin Cast just for the addition of like having it, and then using, so let's say you can find this card off Semius, right? Because Semius doesn't say unit card, it just says search deck for up to 1 card, or search for the top 2 for 1 card. So you can call Twin Cast, which if you don't know the ruling behind orders, when you call an order off a card that like basically calls a card from deck, it'll just go to drop, which usually would be bad, but since this card can activate its effect from drop, it was basically like Semius turn from top 2 basically call 1 into top 2 draw a 15k shield from your deck. So like really, really good. And personally, I don't really feel like I need to have the Caliburn, just because this is like such a good defensive wall. And again, my main strategy was either like stalling enough so I can use Drag Strider multiple times for a game, or just decking out my opponent, and Twin Cast did help me survive their turns. Next up, we have Drag Strider Luard. This is just our main win condition. Usually, they have the Elementaria for the first one, or they have enough shield to guard the first one. So that's why going into the second one, or even the third one, I think I used Drag Strider 3 times against one of my Levidros opponents. And it's at a certain point, they can't guard it because the numbers become so high and you still have triggers left because you're putting crits back with your crest. that Drag Strider at a certain point just becomes so hard for your opponent to guard. And he's an amazing win condition, and he's one of the reasons I even played Luard in the first place. Like, if Luard did not have Drag Strider, like the way he is right now, I would not be playing this deck. And Drag Driver, obviously, it's our first stride, it's our main flipper. Sometimes I went into this guy multiple times, especially in the Levidros matchup, because you do want to thin your deck more, and you also want to keep the scaling going. It's just really, really good to go into this guy, very basic first stride. And of course, there is the 5 to 6 attack combo if you call this, or if you pair this with Morfessa, but that uses like 2 to 3 CB, and you need to have like 2 to 3 ritual units that you want to call from your deck. So it does become kind of difficult. I think I only did that once. Alright, so that's basically it for my list. I'm going to cover a few of my matchups. Not all of them, because I don't want to waste too much time. The main games I lost was round 4 against a Levidros opponent. It was round 4. I lost in round 4 against a Levidros opponent, who I also think got top 8, if I'm wrong, maybe even top 4. I need to double check, but congratulations to that guy. I was doing the strategy that I do against most of the Luard or the Levidros opponents, where I just like let them stack my board with markers and play into the markers, because I know that I can put back PGs, I can thin my deck enough to where late in the game I can draw my PGs, and at a certain point it becomes very difficult for Levidros to actually play, because they'll be drawing so much. Because for those of you who don't know, the marker removal, your opponent has to draw a card if they remove the marker. It's not optional. So at a certain point, it becomes very difficult for your Levidros opponents to even want to remove their markers. And it would have worked if I had seen more of my PGs. Like at a certain point, I had 3 PGs left in my deck, and I could not see them in the end of the game, which sucked. And then earlier in the game, I should have called Pararies. So honestly, that game was really insightful for me learning how to deal with Levidros, because round 5 was against another Levidros, which I actually managed to win, and I had my entire G-Zone face up by the end of that game. So it's a long game, it's a game you're not really sure if you're going to win, and it's a game that's definitely going to go to time, but because of that round I lost against Levidros, I did understand how to play against more Levidros, so I think I would have been more confident. But unfortunately, those was only Levidroses I actually played. And that was the only game I lost in Swiss. My rounds were, round 1 it was against Rezile, round 2 it was against Harry, round 3 it was against Odium, which I won, round 4 it was the only game I lost in Swiss, which was against Levidros, round 5 it was against Levidros, which I won, and then the last 2 rounds were against Rezile players. Super cool Rezile players too. Everyone there was super cool, super nice. I had a lot of fun playing against them. But now let's go into my top 32 game, which is the game I lost, which was a deck I was not expecting really to play, which was Prison. And this deck has an insanely rough matchup against Prison, because you have to play this deck so weirdly, and I did not practice for it. So I burned through my CV way too quickly. This allowed him to damage deny me after my first stride turn, which means I didn't have the board set up to go into like the 5 rituals on board for Drag Strider, and I also didn't have any CB to use for Drag Driver. So what I should have done was called more Owls, or called Luminosity Wizard to soul charge more. Because of that like one turn of damage denial and me being scared, it allowed my opponent to just ramp up their Prison even more and just like kill me. So like that was unfortunate. That was something that was more of a player issue, because I hadn't factored in Prison. And congratulations to that guy. He was a super cool opponent. All my opponents were super cool during BCS. And that's really it. Like, the strategies mainly stayed the same against like decks like Rezile, which I face a lot of, and Levidros. I prioritized this card, along with prioritizing more in my early game by trying to find PGs off of Deoda, and then later in the game putting back PGs. But against a lot of the other decks, the strategy was mainly just go into Drag Strider and hope to God they don't have Elementaria, and if they do, hope they can't really guard it. So that's pretty much it for my BCS Tampa deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions or thoughts about Luard in this current format. Let me know what you think Luard can do in the future, or if you have any ideas for what this list could improve on. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye guys.